welcome to this event within ESOF. Today we will be talking about prediction of social impact and innovation trajectories with a specific focus on early stage investment. My name is Tommaso Portaluri. I am an innovation manager at IN, and I will be co-chairing this session together with Laura Martinelli, who is the CEO of IN. The starting point of this session is that innovation is a social process, and as such has an implication that exceeds the technological and scientific aspects. A well-known dilemma that is in the literature is that technology is very malleable in the early stage when it's very hard to predict what their social consequence will be. But as their impact becomes more visible and the technology is more advanced and is close to the market, then the cost of changing the technology increases dramatically and the room for changes becomes very limited. So having the possibility of predicting the social impact of technology as, first of all, a social value, but as also a very important business case as well that is important for private investment. As somebody put it once, we all know that economists were created to make weather forecaster look good, which suggests that still forecasting is a very much needed activity, but also is a very challenging one. And today we will discuss these topics with three panelists. Max Brigonzi, who is an innovation specialist, research specialist, and EU project manager at Mind the Bridge. Elena Vittone, who is an associate at Endeavor, and Andrea Zorzetto, who is the managing director of Plug and Play Italy. It will be we'll try to keep it as an interactive session. So after this brief introduction, I will immediately leave the floor to Andrea. Before becoming the managing partner of Plug and Play Italy, he has spent 6 years abroad working for the UK government first, and then studying and working in Paris until indeed he launched of startups. Its portfolio includes PayPal, Dropbox, and N26. So the first question that I have for Andrea is indeed, why is it so important for Plug and Play, but also from a more general perspective, to invest at an early stage?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Thanks, of course, to Tommaso and Laura for the organization, and happy to be on the panel with Max and Elena. So yeah, as you mentioned, Plug and Play was created in Silicon Valley. It's an open innovation platform, but also a very active seed investor. So in the early stages of startups, we do about 250 investments per year. Average investment is $100,000, euros. So yeah, really in the early stages of the startups. Last year we did 60% of our investments in the US and 40% around the world. So it's also pretty balanced in terms of geographic breakdown. And in Europe, we're present in 8 countries. Italy is one of the last where we landed. That was last year. And so to your question, I think you already framed it very well. Of course, you can view it from a individual financial perspective, or more for private actors like Plug and Play, which is an investor, or you can view it from a more collective social standpoint. And I think you have obviously the same trade-off or dynamic in terms of early stage. You have more risk, but obviously you also have more upside, right? So for an investor, is much riskier to invest in early stage because it's you don't have really too many metrics on what the startup is doing, and it's much harder whether their product will find a market and how that market will evolve in today's fast changing landscape. So Obviously, the risk is pretty high, but because it's so high, obviously, if you get the right one, then the return can be potentially pretty significant. And of course, from an investor's point of view, it just happens a few times, right? You have to go on the big numbers. That's how American VCs tend to think. And in our case, last year we had this exit with Honey, this American startup that helps customers with shopping online through coupons, and it was bought for $4 billion by PayPal, and the return we had on Honey paid for 2 years of investments for us, and so that's already worthwhile. And I guess from a social point of view, you could make the same point, right? So of course the risk is very high in investing in early stage new ventures, but that's also the way we can get in the long term disruptive new technologies, innovation in new sectors that can bring wide benefits to society. Of course, we can argue, and maybe we'll touch upon that later in the startup VC world, the main drivers being financial profit. So how far is that from social good, from social benefits? Of course, in some cases, it's pretty clear, right? I don't know, transitioning to green technologies or going to Mars or solving diseases, or even giving us access to an incredible amount of information as Google does. When it comes maybe more to clicking on ads and social media, of course, the debate is more heated. But in most cases, it's good both for society and for financial investors to invest in the early stages to support long-term transforming technologies, I'd say.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that the framing of risk, be it financial risk or social risk, is really the key point here. And as you said, it's very risky and can be very rewarding, both socially and financially. And it's very risky because, as you said, we lack metrics. At the same time, we, at least from a public perspective, we are always faced with the need to decide when we are at early stage in what we would like to invest and which directions our society should go. So even with very limited information, we still have to take the social risk of doing such investments and driving the research and innovation agenda. On this, I would like to ask to Max Brigonzi. As I said, he's an innovation research specialist and a project manager at Mind the Bridge. He has been also head of research, working on international reports on open innovation and global startup ecosystems and venture capital, which have been featured on the Financial Times, El Sole 24 Ore, El País. And he has selected and supported over the years hundreds of startups in their business planning and development. And he's, as I said, works in Mind the Bridge, which is an innovation advisory firm, which in 2014 was selected by the European Commission to lead the Startup Europe Partnership. So we are particularly interested in understand how in this initiative financial risk and social risks were handled together, and what have been the major challenges, and if you could give us your perspective on this based on the experience of the Startup Europe Partnership.
Okay, so just to give you a little bit of context, as Mind the Bridge, we put ourselves into the context of becoming an innovation advisory firm, because throughout the years, from our perspective as bridging corporates and startups through innovation, and or at least our mission, it was considered as bridging the world through innovation, and having, we always said, bringing good karma. So try to have a social or deep social impact thanks to that, because we believe that in entrepreneurship and connecting talents which is a way to pursue social impact and social good. So the experience with the Startup Europe partnership that started in Davos in 2014 and went through for 2 iterations of the project from SEP 1.0 and SAP 2.0 along for 5 years. We learned a lot, and we learned that to scale up startups and scale ups have the complete need of connecting with corporates and large corporations and get access to market mostly, and that happens through investment, POCs, and eventually acquisitions. And the connection must be supported through navigation of the corporate, and that requires support by what we call scaling managers, so people that knows how to navigate the corporate and with a complete follow-up structure. So you not just connect once, you do that through a series of activities, events, connections that foster a continuous process, because connecting with corporates requires long due diligence processes, requires a considerable complicated approach, and startups usually do not have time to do so or have very little knowledge on how to connect with corporates. That's why we basically follow up the startup and the corporate throughout all this innovation journey, from the education part, so understanding how to collaborate, and that is a learning process that goes on and on and on, and throughout the follow-up and the finalization of the deal. That's why we have this very long approach that goes on for years, and we leverage a platform that includes what we call scale-up summits, events, closed-door events, whereas startups and corporate meet and then meet again eventually to pursue the collaboration. I can already say a few results of this platform. Over 4 or 5 years, we got startups that the startup we selected raised 4.6 billion in external funding. We had about 30 exits. Let me give you a little bit good numbers, because again, I like to provide numbers that actually. So we got 31 exits and 3 IPOs, and along a series of POCs. So it's quite interesting to know that this works. And meanwhile, we also work not only with large scale-ups, so companies that raise at least 1 million or had a technology readiness level that is appropriate to connect with the corporate. We also work with earlier stage startups. In the context of Startup Europe, during the first 2 years of SAP, we worked on a parallel project called Welcome, where we supported earlier stage startups, which required, first of all, visibility. So pitching opportunities through investors and corporates, and earlier stage connections that provided them with the chance to connect both on a European level, so going global, and moving to Silicon Valley to learn best practices and move forward. We have a few quite interesting spin-off and research-based startups that come from that selection and went very further in life. We remember Swift Comply from Ireland, a good company got acquired recently, and so I think acquired works. And now we're starting to connect a little bit more with the European Innovation Council. So probably we'll go further on that direction. So that's quite the overview of the experience. And so we're moving forward in a parallel way. So we not only support startups, we go providing advisory services to corporates in order to help also them understand how to work with startups and what to do. Because usually a corporate could probably take months, if not years, to work with startups or even navigate the company and with different approaches. But we need the corporate needs to understand how to work with a startup, because you have to go faster, you have to be more flexible and so on. There are a little bit of technology, or maybe you connect with startups or we try to do something that is mostly marketing related. So any of the option the corporates do could be really just marketing or just talk. And that's why we study corporates on the side of open innovation benchmarking. So we try to find each year with the Corporate Startup Stars Awards, which again, part of Startup Europe, we try to identify the corporate that do best with open innovation. It's not just talk, but also action. And we try to measure in a quantitative and qualitative way their actions. And that could be related to POCs, acceleration services, investment exits, outpost in global innovation hubs. And doing an analysis on that, we say, these companies are doing the best. And you, other corporate, are positioned here. And to go to the top, you need to do this, this, and that. And that's a way for us to pursue this dual approach in order to move one part and the other and make them connect and talk. So that's mostly the lessons learned and what we did with Startup Europe. And that's why we're working more and more with the Commission and the public to foster this betterment of the ecosystem.
Thanks a lot. That was a very interesting overview, and on this I would like now to introduce Elena Vittone, who is an associate at Endeavor. Elena graduated in international business at the Copenhagen Business School, and she's worked in Italy and abroad in venture philanthropy and microfinance. And then since 2016, she has been part of the team of entrepreneur selection and growth at Endeavor Italy. It's been very interesting to hear, Max, what you said about Mind the Bridge. Endeavor is a non-profit organization, and I guess that Mind the Bridge as well started as a non-profit organization before becoming a private organization. And Endeavor also fosters entrepreneurship ecosystems, mainly by selecting, mentoring, and accelerating entrepreneurs. And on this, Elena, I would like to ask you to explain us briefly what's the model with which you work at Endeavor, how you support entrepreneurs, and how you take into account as well the topic of the financial risk and also of the social risk as well.
Tommaso and everybody, and good morning. Just following up from what you said, we are actually a non-profit. We have this mission to catalyze long-term growth, economic growth in the country where we operate. And to do this, we select and support what we believe are the best-in-class high-growth entrepreneurs. Also, our company is US-based, based in New York. We have offices in 35 countries around the world. Across all continents, I would say. In Italy, we launched 4 years ago. We work with 28 companies. So you can imagine the selection process is quite rigorous because in 4 years we managed already only to have these companies. They come from different sector and region. Just to give you some names that you may know, we work with Vending Spoons that you may know. It's specialized in mobile apps. And it's very well known currently, thanks to Immuni, that they created. You may know Satispay, payment app, Probos, 3D printing based in Bari, and they recently received an investment from Federico Faggin, the creator of microprocessors. So you may have read about them. To give you some numbers, these 28 companies that are in our portfolio, in our network in Italy, have an aggregated revenues of about 350 million. So they are already consolidated business. We cannot call them startup anymore. They have already a proven business model, a proven product, and what the reason why we select is that we see exponential growth. They really have the ambition and the willingness to grow fast international. The one selected, to answer the second your question, we support them mainly in three ways. The first one, we support their fundraising. So we have both, in this direction, we have both an international network of investors that look at the companies in our portfolio. And we have our own VC fund It's called the Endeavor Catalyst, based in San Francisco. It's a co-investment fund, invests only in Endeavor companies. And we are happy to say that is the Silicon Valley fund that invests the most in Italy. They invest 6 times. The last round was where they joined was the round of Frida. And it's great for our entrepreneurs to have them on board, to have Endeavor Catalyst on board, because when they start to raise money from foreign investor, they present themselves with already a foreigner investor that believe in them and invest them, which is a great, let's say, it's a further traction to start the conversation with such funds, which is not easy for Italian entrepreneurs to catch the attention of American or Berlin-based or London-based funds. The support access to capital is only one of the support we provide. We also support of course, international expansion. So if one of our entrepreneurs would say, no, Davide Dattoli from Talent Garden want to open a campus in Spain, for instance, they can leverage the local office, the local Endeavor office. So that's something that happened actually. The Endeavor Spain colleagues helped the Talent Garden and find the location to find the most trustworthy law firm that can support them from a legal point of view and so on. Third way we support our entrepreneurs is for something related to we call talent. So both talent attraction, but also personal development of the entrepreneur and the team. In this direction, we have a network of more of 5,000 mentors from all over the world. I can mention some from Italy just to make you understand the quality of the mentorship we provide. We have, for instance, Diego Piacentini, former director of the Agenzia Digitale, Trasformazione Digitale dell'amministrazione italiana. We have Pietro Sella, CEO of the Sella Group, and so on. So there are people that are very experienced and can help entrepreneurs with their knowledge. We have partnership with university for the talent attraction and so on. So the last note I would like to give you regarding Endeavor, which is I think what I like the most, is the value of feedback, which is really the most important value for our organization. So as I said, we are a non-profit. So our business model is based on donation. The donor are people that had great success in their professional life and want to support new entrepreneurs. And they do this through Endeavor. The idea is that the entrepreneur that we currently support, when they will have success, will become the donor of Endeavor. So we want to create this I would say that the same dynamic as Silicon Valley, the PayPal mafia. So this idea that who succeed want to support and give back to the new generation of entrepreneur, which I think is very nice for it. It's what Italy needs.
Thank you, Elena, for this overview. And you mentioned so some specific challenges that are very peculiar to the Italian market, to the Italian situation, as well as the role of university in this process. So I think we are aware that there are challenges that are related to Italy specifically, and maybe in Italy, university may particularly struggle in some cases. So in this, I'm very interested to hear from Andrea, who had in the last year tried to launch Startup Europe, plug and play in Italy, and what have been the major challenges in this country, and also what has been or what you foresee that will be the role of universities. So where do you see their contribution? What are you currently doing? And if you can tell us a bit more on this.
Of course, and also very interesting insights from Max and Elena. And I'm very happy to know you. I didn't know you're actually the most active VC in Silicon Valley investor in the Italian market. So, I mean, we've been in the country for a bit more than a year. As I said before, our main line of business in Italy, as in most European countries so far, is the innovation platform, where is the corporate partners that sustain our work. And that's going pretty well, actually. I think in the last two years, there's been a clear increase in the amount of investment by corporates and interest by them. Also in Italy, we work with about 12 Italian large companies. One of them has created a CVC fund. I personally know 2 or other 3 that are trying to create one or already have one. So on the corporate side, I think Italy has definitely been bridging the gap, or at least catching up with other European countries. And in terms of investment money, I mean, as Max was suggesting, we have way less in terms of volumes than other European ecosystems. Not just large countries like France and UK that are similar to us in size, but also much smaller ones. But there as well, there's been an increase. There's this €1 billion national fund by GDP that we all hope is going to create ripple effects within the market. So hopefully on that, we're not closing the gap, but at least trying to catch up. What we definitely see as challenges, well, first, I mean, I have some background in economics. I think in Italy, we do have some basic supply and demand issue, in the sense that startups create products for a market, and usually, of course, they scale in their national market first before going abroad. And for many of the applications that there's a lot of demand for in other countries, in Italy is different, because it's a very old population, quite traditional in the take-up of new technologies. We only have 1 or 2 major cities where you have a lot of young people and new trends, so using, I don't know, digital banks, home delivery, etc. So if you have a small market and less demand than you have in London, Paris, or more dynamic markets, then it's also harder to offer the demand. So that's, I guess, more of a economic challenge. And I mean, when I was in China, I remember someone told me, yeah, here you have startups growing 10% a year, but you know the country grows at 8% a year. So if you do 10, yeah, you're good, but not amazing. When you have a country that grows at 0.1 for 20 years, then if you do 3, that seems nothing, is actually much better than what the country is doing. So I think there's this structural challenge that Italy has had for a long time. Also, when it comes to talent and multinationals, we don't have very large cities. We have less large corporations. So this doesn't have to do just with VC and startups, but it has an impact on that, like everything else on the country. So I think that is the context. But if we take that aside, I think our main experience and our main problem that we've seen as Plug and Play is that we find a lot of startups that have great technical background and maybe great engineering skills, and they develop interesting products. But on the business side, on the ambition to scale, on aiming at very large markets, then we find very few startups that had that kind of mentality that, of course, is very widespread in Silicon Valley, but in some large European cities, we can see it as well. And so you tend to see quite a few niche products, or a lot of focus on the technology, rather than what problem they're solving and how large is the market they're targeting. And maybe that goes a bit to what Elena was saying. So obviously, you have this chain of entrepreneurs that go from one generation to the other in Silicon Valley. I read this beautiful book that is The New Geography of Genius. The Geography of Genius, I think. And he was talking about 8 super innovative places in history, like Silicon Valley, but also Florence in the 1500s, or Vienna in the 19th century. And in all of these cases, having one generation teaching the other, including the artists in Florence, was one of the key factors. And of course, because in Italy we lacked so far successful cases, it's hard to pass down this knowledge and this way of doing things to the younger ones. And in the case of university, of course, I mean, we've seen a trend where a lot of startups are created by people with executive experience or working 20 years in a sector and then creating their startup. This in Europe and the United States is a growing trend, very positive. But other than that, the other main source of technology spin-off startups, of course, is university and what goes on there. And even though we can clearly make a distinction between the US and Europe, like as we all know, in the US there's a very strong link between university and business. There's a mentality to do research that can be spinned off to create business ventures, and there's many more funds, of course. So there's a lot of factors that make the US better than Europe in that respect. And I have to say, I'm not an expert of what goes on in other university ecosystems in Europe, but in the Italian case, it's pretty clear that there's a very strong missing link. Not just in terms of having not enough funds for research, but also having that mentality to then create business ventures. And in our case, as Plug and Play, we work with dozens of universities around the world, and Bocconi is the first one we partnered with in Italy. And of course, Bocconi, in my opinion, plays a very important role because it's the main business school in the country. It's in Milan, that is the main startup hub, and they attract a lot of talent, a lot of foreign people. And of course, you don't just need business people. On the engineering side, of course, Politecnico di Milano is also doing a great job, which we're also starting to work with. But in Bocconi now, the rebooting the startup initiative, trying to stimulate ideas from their own students, and as Plug and Play, we can help them scale with our contacts in Italy and above all internationally. And so trying to address that, what could be the main problem of the missing link between the students, the university, and the actual business world.
Thanks a lot. And on this specifically, I would like to I'd go back to Elena again to hear a bit more and their experience on this, and maybe on the criteria of investments that guide you, especially in investing in science, and what are I know that you have also worked with universities and spin-off from universities. So what are the major hurdles that are met in this route from science to business?
Thank you, Tommaso and Andrea, for your intervention. So when we talk about science, I refer to, healthcare startup or deep tech startup. By definition, they actually provide a technology, an engineering or scientific innovation that did not exist before. So for Endeavor, we are not an investor, but our due diligence is very similar as the investor one. It's not easy to evaluate such business, I would say, first, because you need technical competencies just to understand the technology. Second, because really the evaluation model is completely different than startup in other sector. For instance, when we evaluate, an e-commerce or a digital company, from a quantitative point of view, we consider metrics like growth in revenues, EBITDA. We analyze the balance sheet and so on. When we do the same exercise with a deep tech, for instance, you cannot use the same metrics because they often need long R&D, long time to reach a commercial application, and of course all this process requires a lot of investment. So it is a bit a challenge because the investor have to evaluate the company often without even a prototype, just with the entrepreneur vision. And on the other side, the entrepreneurs need the funding to build the first prototype to show that their vision is real and works. So as a solution, like what we will endeavor to overcome this challenge, I would say there are two strategies. The first is to, of course, consider other metrics than the one you use for other kind of startup. So for talking again about big tech, we consider the number of patents, the background of the entrepreneur, if they manage to raise funds, to receive some, I don't know, European grant and so on. For healthcare, I don't know, the FDA approval and so on. The other way we evaluate such a startup is to ask some expert in the sector to do an evaluation. So to answer the other question and bring some, I would say, success case, I may talk about the Orbit, which is another company in our portfolio. They are based here close in Como. And they do end-to-end services for new space industry, let's say. But the great innovation was in the decommissioning solutions. So they were the first provider of decommissioning solutions for satellite producer. So just to give you some context on the industry that I didn't know. So when you launch a satellite and it ends its life, it remains in the space. There's a lot of risk because, for instance, the risk of collision with other satellites. What the Orbit, and just to add some information, the responsibility to bring the satellite back to Earth is on the operator that launched the satellite, the agency that launched the satellite. And this is a very, first, expensive process, of course, but also very time-consuming. So I think before, until a few years ago, it took between few weeks and more than 20 years, according to the size of the satellite. And what the Orbit, the vision of Luca and Renato, the two entrepreneurs, was to create a technology that was able to reduce the time from months and years to a matter of a few hours. So of course, when they need money to prove that their concept was working, so they went to ask for raise money to some investors, but it was very hard, of course, for investors to understand their technology because they didn't have even a prototype. So just to make the long story short, they had really to refine the business model a lot and to redefine the prototype sketch to manage to raise their first seed round from Quadrivio already many years ago. And after that traction, it was much easier the following steps. So they found the first clients, they did the first launch, that was a proof of concept. They received the Horizon 2020 grant, they raised further money and so on. So talking about their experience when we had to evaluate, it was very tough for us as well. Even again, we are not an investor, but we had the same challenge as the investor. So what we did was, of course, to check other metrics. So they had already the patented technology. Luca Renato has a great background. They are both PhD in aeronautical engineering. They won the Fulbright scholarship for MBA at Santa Clara University. They had already raised the first money, so it was already great traction. And we asked an Argentinian entrepreneur, I think it was the CEO of Satellogic, which is another nano-satellite producer, to evaluate them. And in this way, we reduced the risk, and they were selected. And currently, actually, it was a great decision because they are really going great. They did another launch a few days ago, and so in our case, this process to reduce the risk actually works, or at least we believe it works.
Thanks a lot, Elena, and also Andrea for the overview that you gave us on the Italian and Italian academia challenges. And I would like now to broaden a little bit the overview from the Italian to the global scale, also building on a question that we have received from one of the attendees, who is asking about the market size affected startups, but he's asking a little bit more on how this develops in the US. And especially he asked about the example of Microsoft that are operating In operating we sold to IBM. That was the only customer, but a big one. So the size of the market was not provided by the number of customers, but by the size of one customer. And I think that yeah, it's nice as we were nonetheless moving on looking a little bit with Max maybe at some of the research that you have done on the bridge, at exactly looking at global scale-up ecosystems and what are the main trends globally. And maybe you would like also to add something on this question on number of customers and then the size of customers. And then I'm sure that my co-chair Laura will have plenty of questions for you as well following Max's intervention.
Okay. So let me give a little bit of a context overview, starting from Italy and going towards perspective. So in terms of research at Mind the Bridge, we do a lot of comparisons between global innovation ecosystems and countries, trying to track the scale-up presence. So number of scale-ups, so companies that raise at least 1 million, deep tech scale-ups, also in the digital area mostly. And the capital that they raised, both from VC, IPO, or ICO, if required, and we try to compare that to the size of the country. So our latest analysis from 2020 paint again a grim picture for Italy, as we at the moment our preliminary assessment include we track 263 scale-ups that raise 2.4 billion, which means that compared to the size of the economy, the capital raise accounts for 0.12% of the GDP, which is about 1/5 of the European average, and 0.4 scale-ups every 100k inhabitants, which again is less than 1/3 that European average. And global ecosystems, larger ones, like smaller in size but larger in terms of advancement, like Israel, completely outperform. You see Israel that it has like 1.6k in number of scale-ups that raise about 40 billion. Silicon Valley is totally in another league with 7.5k scale-ups that raise about 3.6 billions. And China is a booming ecosystems with 11k scale-ups that raised about 400 billion. So the main point here is that the main problem for Italy is that it's a small market. It has a small stock market. There are no extensive large companies that are not public supported. So you see that the private sector, the private corporate sector, pure private corporate sector in Israel is a little bit small compared to the other ecosystems. So if you see, and that brings us also to another point of analysis, that is the digital single market. It is something that the European level is being discussed many years. So you see, if you go into the US, you open a branch there or you get funding there, you get access to a 300 million people market by day one. So that's it's not happening exactly in Europe. In Europe, you have separate. You still have separate markets. Again, you can have some regulation that it's connected. You can. It's easier than before, but you still have countries that speak different languages. You have several different regulations in there. You may have some red tape here and there, and you always have to connect with different cultures. You have to hire one person in Germany. It's different than hiring a person in Italy. It's different than hiring or leaving off a person in Spain, for example. These are a few blockades and complications that we track in a report that we made on dual companies. So scale-ups that start from a local ecosystem, let's say Italy or Spain, and then move their headquarters abroad, let's say London or Silicon Valley, because they have to access larger markets. And so that's why our approach started to connect startups to corporates that have that global approach, the best ones. Because as indicated in the comment that you mentioned before, if you go, you're Microsoft, you get a contract with IBM, you have a huge contract. Again, it could be just one, but you have access to a lot of markets, or at least the largest market of IBM. And that's the same way in Europe. So you start from Italy, you get connected to Orange, and you get access to a global ecosystem. If you get access to the best global corporates, you get access to a real large market. And to do so, throughout the years of SAP project, we learned that companies on scale-ups, especially in Italy, and I would like to be allowed to say that especially deep tech companies coming from research, so that has not from the very beginning the startup or scale-up approach within. So they started. The main task is to do technological transfer, rather than creating a company that has the potential to scale up. So that's another step, because that's entrepreneurial stuff. And they need to acquire the scaling factors, which we identify as business growth qualified opportunities, access to international markets and external ecosystem, especially if the internal market is small, access to late stage funding if required, and especially exit opportunities. And if exit opportunities in Italy are very slow or small, because we have a small stock market, we have a few private corporates that do acquisition, it's key to go abroad. And especially the last but not the least, you need operational capacity and strategic scaling mindset. And to achieve scaling mindset, not only qualified matching is the cornerstone, but implementation is key. You have to go just beyond matching corporates. You need to have people that provides continuous, dedicated professional effort to support the startup in navigating the process of reaching to the corporate, because it's not just matching once and then it's done. You need to have a follow-up procedure that brings the startup to the connection to the final POC or acquisition. And that's a long process. And for that, first-hand scaling experience is key. You cannot improvise that. You have to connect startups and corporates together, leveraging people that has scaling experience, because it can understand better the needs of the two parties and then move forward. So again, this green picture, I can add a few more data points in order to understand that Italy has a real need in this. Just very quick to close up this part here. We did a preliminary analysis on the EAC, European Innovation Council Accelerator pilot portfolio, which is starting to have like a venture capital approach towards deep tech companies coming from research, especially in university and academia. And we learned something, that doing an assessment on the most high scalability potential ones, we found that in Italy is second in terms of grant received, in terms of sheer number of companies that receive a grant. You have Spain that is like 20%, and then you have Italy is like about 9-10% of the grants received in terms of numbers. But the high scalability potential that we identified is about half of that percentage. So it's you see that you have companies that have a scaling mentality or scaling culture or potential that is a bit lower than the amount of grants received. So that's why you really require a global approach. And that's the main difference. So just to sum it up, I see that companies in Europe still have problems connecting with several cultures, several ecosystems. You need to work towards the digital single market and a real single market, because in Europe, otherwise you have a plethora of different of different ecosystems and different regulations, different everything, and thus you go to Silicon Valley or you go to US to access a large market. You need to have a strong private sector and support corporates into getting open innovation activities that go beyond talks, that go beyond marketing, that go towards real actions. And to do so, you have to educate them as well. And regarding academia and the connection, we need to foster hybrid models in terms of acceleration services, education, and open innovation, as we tracked recently in an accelerator report that we worked on, shifting toward hybrid models of acceleration that include corporates into the process, that include hybrid modelization of venturing investments all together into a package that supports startups going beyond just getting money and who knows, or getting a few services and who knows, but creating this continuous follow-up development process up towards the final result that should be the POC or the acquisition.
Thank you, Max, for this very interesting reply. Now, if I may, I would like to stimulate a little bit the debate with some quick, let's say, questions to you. And then maybe we can have some more interaction with our participants. I know there's already another question, so right after this quick round, we can come back. And if the participants have any question, please put it into the chat. They will be taken up and our speakers can answer you. Okay, one question to start with. I hope it'll be useful for our speakers as well. And it goes to Elena. Elena, you mentioned, you said a sentence at a certain point in your intervention. You said, these are not startups anymore. They have a proven business model. To our experience, many times startups are not sure when they reach this threshold, and hence they might reach towards venture when they're not ready, something like that. So if you may help our audience to understand what you mean when you say a proven business model, if there is a threshold on revenues or any other metrics you use.
Yes, thank you, Laura, for the question. So as I said, and so in Endeavor we have this target which are scale up, and our definition of scale up are again company that manage to we say to pass from 0 to 1, which is the startup phase, and are ready to are willing to move from 1 to 10, so scale up quickly. So we have this element which we evaluate, which is called inflection point. So for inflection point, we mean startup that have already completed the development of the product, have a proven business model, and which definition we mean a business model with traction. So there is already evidence that your business model is working. And this traction, as I said before, for a digital startup or e-commerce is revenues. So how much you manage to sell through your platform. For other kind of startup, like it can be, I don't know, again, deep tech or healthcare, a proven business model means other kind of traction, other kind of metrics that we go to evaluate. For instance, for healthcare company, we see if they have already FDA approval. For a deep tech company, we check the technology readiness level, which is this matrix, this table that allow us to understand with some checklist to understand which kind of readiness the technology is. But what's the most important thing for us is not only at which point you are now, but your ambition to scale. So in Italy, we often meet entrepreneurs or often family business that have very nice companies, super innovative product, but they are just not interested to scale the company. They just want to have flat growth, which is totally fine. What Endeavor look for is ambition and willingness to grow exponentially, which is of course higher risk, as coming back to the very first question, but it's what we believe can have an impact on the wealth and job creation in the ecosystem where we operate.
Thank you, Elena. Very clear. Hence, if I may sum up in terms of the proven business model, the startups should have very clear how near they are to create value and to really have a unique selling point that the client will buy. Okay, thank you so much. Another question I would like to pose to Max in terms of the relationship between private and public support to startups. You work a lot with the EIC, the European Innovation Council. For our audience, this is now the main pillar of the European Commission in terms of supporting startups, and with, I might say, a substantial investment. So Max, my question is the following. The EIC is now providing, as you know, also soft blending funding, so going into far beyond a pure grant. And is working a lot in strict collaboration with you and with other venture, whether corporate or not. But there are some critiques out there in terms of the capabilities of the EIC to create a real ecosystem instead of remaining a sort of, if I may say, public injection of money into startups. So what's your thinking on this topic?
Okay, so the history of the IC Accelerator pilot, which was called the EASB project, goes like 5 years ago. And yeah, it's this critique was probably true 5 years ago, or as a few situation where it was like, because it was kind of public injection. So you start with a Accelerator pilot phase 1, which is 50K to the company, just to deliver a feasibility study, which mainly overlooks into prototype, if any, or just moving towards a new TRL status. And that's mainly money injection and raining money. But the second part, which is the EIC Accelerator pilot phase 2, it provides about 1.5-2 million euros into direct funding, as probably started priorly as only public funding towards SMEs that had innovative projects. Towards, and I can say that also first-hand experience, because I also worked with a startup that was applying to the Accelerator pilot phase 2, and when we reached the final stage of the competition, while I was working with Mindbridge and so on. So even first-hand, but that comes also from a EIC portfolio analysis that we performed on all the 1.5K companies of the EIC portfolio, just to say that it's both first-hand anecdotal experience plus deep, in-depth desk research analysis on that. We found out that this money is getting more and more venture-like. So the goal of the evaluators and the EIC is to provide this money like it's a Series A. Their goal is to create European success stories of deep tech companies that become unicorns. And from our initial assessment of the portfolio, we found that about 40 of these 1.5K companies already reached a stage of growth that is comparable to the some of the top scale-ups in Europe, or at least they're moving towards that direction. We found that 20%, about 10 to 20% of them have high scalability potential in terms of external other funding raised, revenue growth, recent novel funding acquired, growth in terms of employees, that hints towards that kind of brighter future. And another 30% that may reach that high scalability profile in about 1 or 2 years, considering our own assessment. And that's why we see that in terms of services to that companies, the EIC is providing what was called before the ASME phase 3, a bunch of services. It is connected with this try to create some overlook structures for that, like the tip of the pyramid, to help these end of the funnel match with corporates, reach global markets, increase their visibility, and literally become unicorns. That's the ultimate goal. Probably in these 5 years, they learned a lot. So I have to say that I'm quite optimistic of this, because they really changed their approach and it became more venture-like. They're involving more and more venture capitalists into the evaluation process, which is nice, and ecosystem builders. So they having people that gives first-hand experience on that evaluation process, which I have to say is quite, it's really quite interesting. And it's not just technology. You have a venture capitalist that let's say the ultimate yes or no to those companies. So in time, it's getting more and more interesting. So I understand the critiques, but I think they've been heard.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. So summing up, there is an ecosystem that is being created in Europe, and this might be really influential in terms of, let's say, the global competition. Thank you so much. I have a question for you, Andrea, that maybe it's might be the most tricky one, I'm sorry for that, but you mentioned something in your intervention talking about the social impact of startups and the topics. You said, okay, how far are we in bringing forth social impact? If the startup has any technology that might help towards climate change or whatever, it's relatively easy to draw this link. But in other cases, if it is, for instance, pure high tech, but with no immediate, let's say, either product, a service, or process that goes towards greenization or whatever, it might not be so clear, the link. So my question is, shall we support technology and high tech per se, having faith that this will bring forth a positive evolution, let me say the old school, or shall we be much more focused on which topics, meaning which technologies will deserve support, hence being quite strict on letting go others? What's your thinking on this?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for the question. It's yeah, you're right, it's tricky, but I think it's crucial as well. Of course, it's not I guess a question limited to startups, right? It goes to the relationship between state and market and society, and it's almost philosophical, I guess. Like, is something good if there's demand for it, or if we decide as a society that it is good, right? Those are the two approaches. I mean, in my opinion, of course, if there's demand for it, and so the market provides it, as long as it is not clearly harmful, then it's okay. I mean, maybe we realize that social media, I mean, there's increasing evidence that can have very adverse effect on people. And so as we moved before to regulate, I don't know, tobacco companies, maybe we should do the same with social media. Maybe it's not as strong, and it's not a good comparison, but that's what I mean. So there's a space for it, and people want it, and maybe we should just be careful with its effects. I think that the very interesting question is what the state and like public authorities should do. And in that case, I don't think they should say, oh, these are the technologies that we have to go for. And it's not just a question of what is good for society, but also what works. Like sometimes there's a hype in new technologies, there's new fads, and then they turn out not to be actually feasible or that they make sense, right? And there's clear evidence that in many cases, when it comes to applications, not basic research, but applications, the market is probably better than the state in finding out what works. What I think is very important is what you were hinting at as well, is that the state and we as a society, we give direction to solve the most important challenges of today, especially if the market is not doing enough, and maybe focusing more on the problem rather than the solutions. Like, so climate change, of course, is an easy example in the sense that it's clear that it's very problematic. We have to solve it. I don't think we can argue that the state is going to find the solution alone. And when it comes to trial and error and finding business models and technologies that can help mitigate the impact, probably the private sector is better. But if we have the direction by the public that sets challenges, it provides funds, adapts regulation, and makes clear that everyone should solve this challenge, then it's how I envisage to find a balance and having the state playing a role in this. So focusing on the problem setting the challenge, setting some incentives, and then letting the market work with that. And of course, it be climate change, it can be very hard diseases to cure, or it can be other key challenges we face. Of course, today we have coronavirus and pandemics, which can be another one. And it's more similar, I guess, to what happened in the US with the history of Silicon Valley, right? So you have those people that say, oh no, but Steve Jobs and Bill Gates are all private entrepreneurs. And those that say, oh, everything started with the government investing in DARPA and those initiatives. And actually, I think you need both, but in different ways, right? So you had the Cold War challenge, and you had going to the moon challenge, and a lot of investment in basic research and providing what the mission is. And then you had the private sector working with that framework and doing trial and error and finding the solutions, and ultimately finding also consumer products based on those technologies. And I think we should do the same, again, with climate change or those challenges.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So if I may sum up in a way, correct me if I don't recap you properly. Maybe the message I take from your answer is that the entrepreneur is required today, without any naivete from my side, but he's required to have a more aware role in society, where of course the startup is about profit, but the way how you make profit makes a difference today.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. I hope that this round of questions has been interesting for our audience. I know that there are more questions now, so I would like to give back the stage to Tommaso so that the audience questions can be brought to our speakers. And thank you again for all these very interesting and top-level answers.
Thanks a lot, Laura, for your reflections and your questions. And I know that so Max gave an answer before to the questions on size of market and number of customer and size of one customer. There was also during your intervention a question on what you were discussing on scale up. And specifically, the objection was that Siemens scale up in Germany and was not impeded by the problems to expand across the EU in a time when the EU did not even exist. So I think this was related to barriers that you were mentioning in scale up. So I don't know, maybe if you want to reply to this, but I think that before that, Andrea also wanted to pick up on the question on number of customers versus size of customers.
I'll be very quick so I can then let Max reply to yours. And my only point is that, I mean, of course, you can have a huge market with even just one customer if you're in a situation of monopoly or monopsony. So you have just one large buyer. That's not ideal, of course, because then I mean, the power balance is tilted towards the other side, but you can still have a large demand for your product, so it can still work. Then, as an example of Microsoft and IBM and many other examples, it's not so much the market today, but also the potential market tomorrow. So maybe when you start, you have one customer or a few early adopters, but it can become huge, and that's what VCs in the early stage look for. So, I mean, if we take Uber or B&B, when they pitched their startups, there was no market for that, and no one had tried the solution. But potentially, what they were addressing, the transportation or the hospitality sectors, they were incredible. And same Microsoft, when it was creating, no one had a PC, and it was something very new. But the potential for everyone to have a PC on their desk, everyone in the world, was pretty large market. So I say in that sense, and you know, I totally agree with what Max was saying on the size of the digital single market, and that we should improve at that. Siemens comes from industrial era, so I think it has different logics. And for the world of big tech and internet platform, scale from day one is pretty important. The scale of the the economic market you're in. So that's why I agree with Max. But you can also find other approaches, right? So that's maybe not a way for Germany or France that are large countries, but many European ones that are small. They can have Israel as a model, which is tiny, and it doesn't have big internet platforms, but in many sectors, it definitely punches above its weight, and it creates a lot of innovation that way. I don't know if Max agrees on that, but I'll pass it on to him.
Okay, yeah, I do definitely agree, because the potential is one of the most important things to adhere to. Regarding the question, Siemens did not scale up in first scale up in Germany was impeded by its plan to expand across the EU. Wow, we're talking about Siemens. That is a company that started actually in the 1800s. So I think the world was quite different. So the point is that let me summarize a little bit. So if we're talking about deep tech companies, okay. So with if you think deep tech demand for deep tech in Italy, how high is that? There are a lot of manufacturing companies that tried. Some companies, especially, I think that Andrea knows about this a little bit more than me firsthand. That traditional companies are starting now to approach deep tech companies. It's a process. It's a long process. So you see that there are a few of them that are starting to do great, but they are at the start of the process. So in Italy, market for Italian deep tech companies, it's not that large. They're required to go beyond, and they're required to go beyond and assess markets that are quite different, by the way. So probably Siemens started in Germany, which was already a nice market at the time, and then move beyond. These companies here need to be global from day one, because again, as Andrea mentioned, the market potential is key. So you can start saying my market is Italy. You have to start saying my market is global, and to do so, you need, as soon as you have a validated business model through product development that is ready to market, you need to go on a global approach, on a global market, reach out to the global innovation hubs. And to do so, connecting with corporates that have access to, or supporting institutions like Plug and Play, for example, or others that have access to this big plethora of international hubs is key. Because at the moment they're quite different companies. They have a very specific. The more deep their company is, the more specific the market is. The more specific the application are. If you say about drones for agriculture, for example, you got a very specific niche. You have to disrupt entire markets that probably are more traditional, and maybe in Italy that's still a process that is ongoing. That's why, as I mentioned, Andrea mentioned as well, we're talking about the Fondo Nazionale Innovazione and all these areas, because we need a jump start on that. We're like years years late for that. That's why we needed 1 billion in 1 year. That's the option. So that's what's happening. So we need to cross the gap, and otherwise we're a little bit slower than the rest of the people. So that's why I hope I answer a little bit to the question. We're talking about a little bit of a different market here, but it makes sense actually. It was different time. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible to scale with that. Facilitating scaling up at a global level increase chances of succeeding. That's probably the main answer.
Yeah, that's very clear. There is always a problem of representative samples that is there. There is one more question on will innovators in the EU be able to compete in the digital single market against more agile competitors from abroad? So I think Max, maybe you want to repel on this, or no? So if also Andrea maybe wants to add something on this.
Very quick. It's true that from an initial assessment, countries such as China, South Korea, we recently launched a report on South Korea, are booming, and they're booming differently. So competition will be harsh. That's true. The point is, it's true that we can reach a larger market in Europe. They can do so, but at the point being, we can connect to that global outposts. Say if South Korea grows, there's space for European companies to go there or to connect. And think about the fact that as I don't remember who, but someone here presented that for maybe Andrea, that startups that grow become big and they create spillovers. Or maybe Elena. So that's a good, interesting approach. If you have huge scale-ups, unicorns in South Korea, they become clients for you in Europe, and so on. So connecting global ecosystems has actually positive externalities. If there come people that invest here, so you get access to another market. So that's a global connection that I think is quite interesting, rather than a threat. But by the way, I'm kind of optimistic on the side, so maybe a little bit biased.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, do you have?
No. So interesting question. I think the distinction that also Elena was doing before, I mean, between deep tech or pure digital internet platform is very important, because it's very different dynamics. In the case of deep tech, of course, I mean, there is where Europe, I think, can stand a chance to catch up with the United States, because we have a stronger track record in industry rather than services as compared to the US. These sectors are being disrupted later. The returns are less appealing to maybe a Silicon Valley investors, but it can be actually our competitive advantage. So I think a lot of good, interesting products are going to come out of Europe and also of Italy. But yeah, competition, I don't think that it's that much about agility, but how good and how cheap the product is and the technology in case of deep tech. And so, for example, Italy, that so many businesses were impacted by the rise of China at the low end, like cheap products, not the high quality, but created on scale. Now that China has advanced so much from an industrial viewpoint in producing ever more and more advanced goods, it's going to become even more challenging for European manufacturers to compete with that, as long as globalization and free trade doesn't keep not collapsing, but I mean decreasing as it's been over the last year. And for digital platforms, I think, and that's the key point that also Max was making, is different because it's so hard to go. Each European country is so different one from the other for culture, language, regulation, etc., that the cost to enter every new market are pretty high. So if you scale in a huge market like the US, where you have a lot of capital, large revenues, a lot of data, you can develop better algorithms, you have a big brand on the internet, and then it's easier for you to conquer all the European markets because you can make the investment rather than a European startup that starts from one and then to the others. And so for digital internet platforms, I think that it's been like that for more than 10 years, and it's hard to see how it's going to change, as Max was explaining.
Thanks, Andrea. There is one last question. I'm sure Elena maybe wants to say something on this, but please also Max and Andrea feel free to join the discussion. So what are the strategies to enhance the network between universities and entrepreneurship?
Yes, I can say something about this. So as I said, one of the way we support our entrepreneur regards talent. And this means both talent attraction, because as you can imagine, Statistay or Talent Garden has not a brand that can have a consulting company or a Ferrero. So the best graduate always aim to be hired by this big company and don't even think that this is such a nice opportunity to work in such a high growth company. So this is one challenge. Another challenge is personal development of the entrepreneur. So regarding the relationship with the university, We support both talent attraction, so we try to give visibility to our company to this target. So we do company presentation. So our entrepreneur go to university, present their company, their story, and this is great because first they make students know about scale-ups, which are not always the main dream for a student. But on the other side, they inspire students. So, if I think about myself at university, I didn't even think that being an entrepreneur was an option. So if you have Alberto Dalmasso from Statistei or Davide Dattoli from Talent Garden telling your story when you have 20 years old, I think this can create a mindset towards entrepreneurship, which I think in Italy we're a bit behind, and in particular for scientific faculties, where the real innovation come from, technological innovation come from. And just to complete the overview, the other relationship we have with university, in particular with US universities, I'm talking about Harvard, Stanford, INSEAD mainly, they build courses just for endeavor entrepreneur on topics that are interesting for them. So how to scale your team when you move from 10 people to 100 people, how to restructure your organization, how to scale sales. And this is it's like a win-win relationship because entrepreneurs have benefit, but on the other side, students and university have a benefit too.
Clear. Thanks a lot, Elena. Of course, it was not the last question. There is a new message I read. It is not really a question. It says that South Korea is a nice example, and a market initially much smaller than Italy, not in any international market alliance, and still companies managed to become global. And already some years ago, the patents with EPO were put in by Samsung and LG. And so this example does not support the market size theory. Still, it's true that the minimum working hour time is 48 hours. So I don't know if you have any reflection on this. I think Andrea is.
Yeah, no, maybe I didn't explain well my point before, but the market size when you start as a startup, it matters a lot if you want to be a digital internet platform. And indeed, if we look at large internet platforms today, they are either from the US or China. Of course, correlation is not causation, but it was pretty clear how having a huge market of a lot of connected smartphones and internet users was pretty important to scale quickly for those internet platforms. So yeah, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix, Airbnb, Uber, or in the case of China, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, and I mean, we know them. If we're talking about industrial conglomerate or producers of manufacturing goods, when South Korea, but also Germany, in the case of Italy as well, even though in a more limited manner, you can definitely start in your country, as Siemens did 150 years ago, and then go global. But that's a bit of the old world. I think the interesting question is when it's neither of these cases. When it's innovative startup, maybe in the deep tech area, or where it's not so much about creating huge platforms. If then you can start from a small market and go global. And in that case, Israel definitely is doing it. And so that maybe is a chance for many European countries to do it as well. You could argue that it's too late to create our own social network platforms starting in Europe. And then we should just focus on the next wave, maybe on deep tech and the sectors that also Elena was talking about.
If I can add another example on Andrea's point is Brazil. So in Endeavor Brazil has so many unicorns. Like in Europe, we have only Spain that has a couple of unicorns, Glovo and Bify. In Brazil, from day one, you have a market of 200 million people that speak the same language and have the same culture. So it's much easier to scale a company. if we compare it with Italy, we are 50 million. We are the only country speaking Italian. We have a very peculiar culture. So when we go to Germany or to France, without talking about US, of course, the challenges, the obstacles are huge. So this is another point, I think, to highlight Andrea's.
Thanks, Ellen. Okay, so that was really the last question. So if there are no further reflections from the speakers, I thank you very much. So thanks, Serena, thanks, Max, and thanks, Andrea, and thanks to Iso for hosting us. And yeah, thanks everybody for following.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day. Thank you very much.